the things that really light me up and keep me going for months at a time, the stuff that expands your horizons and shows you more of the world and the human experience, it's like it shows you more colors on the visible spectrum. Those works of art, that's what I hunt for. We're talking about Tusk today, written and directed by Kevin Smith. I can't tell you how much I love this movie. I'm so excited to talk about it.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was a weird one. It's really weird. And that I'll read you the email that we got, and then we can talk about it. So it's from Adam. Adam says, "Hey Maggie and Cam, have you guys ever seen the movie Tusk? It's a weird ass A24 horror movie that seems like exactly the kind of thing you'd be interested in. Basically, Justin Long goes to interview this old guy, and the old guy kidnaps him and tries to turn him into a walrus. That's truly all there is to say. Hope you guys like it, Adam." Adam, you are correct. We loved it.
Yes.
And this is a movie I had heard of. We talked about watching this in the past. Like, we knew it existed. We're like, that one looks funky and weird. And we were like waiting for, I don't know, us to be in the right mood or whatever to watch it, because we knew it was going to be kind of weird. Maybe we wouldn't like it. We weren't sure. But I'm so glad we had this excuse to watch it, because it was a delight.
And this is a bit earlier in the A24 history than you and I have usually delved. The Witch was 2015, and this was 2014. So it's an hour and 42 minutes, produced by A24. And I was expecting it to feel like a sort of a parody movie.
Yeah.
Maybe sort of a Cabin in the Woods commentary style horror thing.
That's what I was expecting too, because I knew it had elements of humor. So I was expecting, almost a parody.
And Adam did a great job kind of pitching the movie there. Definitely go watch it. But even if you listen to the episode first, it's the visuals and the feeling that you get from this film that will blow you away regardless of spoilers.
I was going to say, there really aren't many spoilers. It's a pretty straightforward plot.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll spoil the ending, but I guess we can warn you.
The
but
visual, it's the tone, it's the this one has stuck with me maybe more than any other Summerween movie we've talked about. So I'm super excited for this. So I like the way he pitched it in the email, and I'm going to kind of transition out of that.
Okay.
So my basic my theory that I want to offer about this movie is that it's a joke, but beneath that joke is something gorgeous and painful and wonderfully sincere.
Yeah.
But it's got this mask of like low budget camp on top of it. But underneath the walrus makeup and prosthetics and shit, it is a painfully sincere movie. And it masks that with all these kind of misdirections and making fun of edgelord stuff. It's got all that on top of it. But I think there's a really startling sincerity underneath that. We get these glimpses of withering guilt and real total sadness. It's a really powerful movie, weirdly. But to zoom out a bit, this film, I think this is my idea that we were kind of spitballing during the end credits. I think this is half Dracula and half Frankenstein.
Yes, absolutely. Those two things are very much there.
Yeah, and those are, as much as those are stories or books or movies, they almost have their own canon.
Yeah.
So let's run through that quickly.
Sure.
This film starts off with an unlikable Jonathan Harker.
Yes.
That's Wallace, played by Justin Long, who's our protagonist.
If you don't know, Jonathan Harker is the main guy in Dracula who goes and meets Dracula.
Yeah, I'm getting there.
Okay, sorry.
So, Harker arriving at a distant, dark castle. And Harker is sort of a vague businessman in Dracula. And here, Wallace is a modern fake businessman because he's a podcaster.
Yeah.
And there's this wonderful kind of indictment of edgelord culture and internet-era exploitation and reaction videos and all that kind of stuff, which is also interesting because Kevin Smith has been a podcaster for, almost 20 years.
Yes.
And this idea began as a riff on a podcast that he then took seriously and wrote out as a movie and got, financing for.
Yeah.
And Mina Harker, who is Jonathan Harker's wife in the Dracula story, she's kind of the canary in the coal mine. Where she's the first one who's turned, she's the first one who dies, and it has the Hedwig or Dobby effect of making you realize the danger of the antagonist and take the whole thing seriously. The Mina Harker in this story, who's Wallace's girlfriend, she's sort of a riff on the Dracula formula too, because she's unfaithful. She's impure in a way that Mina, she's like dressed in white. She does the whole thing.
Yeah.
She's always presented as very pure and innocent. I like that they make Mina, the version of Mina here, much more complicated.
Yeah.
And instead, the pureness, despite the kind of vulgarity of his character, is Wallace. Because he has such a clean, kind of one-note character arc up until he gets to this, distant castle.
Yes.
And the turn in Dracula is that he turns these women into his wives. He bites women, and then they, turn into sort of Dracula-looking brides.
Yeah.
Usually they fly. It's the teeth. It's the whole thing. Go watch Van Helsing with Hugh Jackman, which we are going to cover with Tristan at some point.
That'll be fun.
So instead of that, this movie, and this is the kind of elevator pitch that's so fun here, the Dracula's wives in this story are these Frankenstein walruses that this guy creates. So the Dracula in the story is named Howard, and he has a similar creation process where he has to sort of bite, and instead of Dracula biting and turning the women into his wives, this guy Frankenstein's people into becoming his walrus companion.
Yes.
And I like the wife comparison because it does feel very quietly acknowledged within the script. There's a moment where, as sort of the Mina character is chasing down what happened to Wallace, she meets this detective, who we'll get to in a second, who is giving her the backstory on this, the Dracula character, the Howard, who he's framing as a serial killer who's abducting and mutilating people. And he gives, this department has given the serial killer the nickname of First Wife.
Oh, I missed that. I completely missed that. When did they say that?
It's a joke that they throw out at the fast food place.
Oh, okay. I totally missed that.
It's within the context of like what he does to them. It's this kind of crude riff on that.
Yeah, interesting.
They call him First Wife. I thought that was interesting.
Cool, yeah.
So that detective is a heavily obscured and deranged Johnny Depp. With a fake nose, a wig, a hat. His makeup is all over the place, and they're making him look artificially old. He is this story's Van Helsing. Van Helsing is a classically eccentric character. He is a glut of information on whatever the supernatural bad guy is. And here he's wildly French, but they keep with kind of the tradition of him being old and sort of wise, but off kilter. And we get, as we cut back to Wallace at Howard's house, so Harker in Dracula's castle, we get some Dracula backstory. In the book, this is sort of a longer section that is never included in a film adaptation. You learn about his history and where he's from and the tragedy and violence of all that. Here we get some fake history. And you always get the sense in Bram Stoker's novel that Dracula's kind of riffing or like screwing with Harker. You're not sure what's true or not. And you have that same sense here as Howard sitting there telling these kind of tall tales to Wallace.
Like did he actually meet Ernest Hemingway, or is he just saying it to keep him interested, or
And then there's the walrus backstory that he gets to as the poison sets in and Wallace is incapacitated. And there's that idea that part was true. Even though it's the most impractical.
The most absurd one.
he delivers that part so passionately that you believe that. And you start to doubt the things you were sure of before. It has this great disconcerting effect on everything you've seen here. And then we cut through this transition. We accelerate the walrus kind of creation part and burn down the Jonathan Harker character. And that process is where the story becomes Frankenstein. And sort of stops being Dracula. I've always said that the first third of Dracula, like once you leave the Jonathan Harker Dracula interaction and terrorizing, I think the story kind of falls off a cliff.
I totally agree.
And Kevin Smith seems to agree with me here because he abandons.
So he moved on,
he abandons that part and jumps to Frankenstein.
Which is good throughout.
It's this wonderful curation process of taking these structural perfections. They're tropes, but we love them, and they work every single time. Dracula and Frankenstein are bulletproof story structures. And I love that he's just picking bits and pieces of what works and creating this new whole. It feels like this film is a wonderful collage of all the classic elements of Universal monster movies. And this feels like it sits in that canon. It doesn't need to be black and white. It feels like it's got a little bit of camp, a lot of style, and it's just simmering with commentary and subtext underneath that.
A lot of those Universal movies do have elements of camp. I hadn't thought about that. That makes total sense because they're old-timey, so they're a bit over-dramatic, over the top, and that's how this one is too.
So our Dracula character, Howard, now becomes an imperfect Dr. Frankenstein.
Yeah.
Where we've got this sense of his impossible drive and the impossible goal, which was so central to Mary Shelley's novel, where you believe in almost the momentum of the Doctor in his hope to create life and electrocute this corpse back to life. The drive is so infectious that the goal stops seeming impossible. You almost start to, your feet kind of leave the ground for a second before the monster comes to life, because you believe in it. And this whole transformation process of Wallace being turned into a walrus, it has that delirious sort of effect, because he's cutting off bits of him.
Yeah.
And you don't know what the final thing's going to look like.
No.
But he seems to have such a plan.
Yeah.
And there's this suggestion that, oh shit, he's done this before.
Exactly, because that's not revealed till later. Like, at first you think maybe this is his first time trying this out, but then it becomes clear that, oh no, he's done this many times. And that's even more upsetting.
And there's maybe, for me, the defining quality of Dr. Frankenstein in the book is his guilt. And I think this film takes a new approach to where the guilt lies within the Frankenstein story.
Yeah.
In the book, it's guilt because he created a monster who goes on to kill people.
Yeah.
And murder townspeople, and then the pitchforks and all that.
Yeah.
Here, there's guilt within Howard because he's already murdered the monster. He, I mean, that's what he tells us in the story, is that he had a friend who was a walrus who saved him, and eventually he was stranded for so long and help wasn't coming that he had to kill the walrus and eat it.
Yeah.
So it's not just guilt for murdering the monster. He doesn't even think it was a monster.
Yeah.
So it's just that murderous guilt. He's almost flipping it and becoming like a sentient Frankenstein's monster.
Well, right. And then, like, in trying to recreate the walrus, he's trying to, like, undo what he did and bring it back to life, even though he's actually killing people.
He's building another one.
Yeah.
And it's not just, like you said, it's not just to replace the original. He wants to give this new monster a chance to fight back and possibly win.
Yes.
It's like this rematch because he thinks he won by cheating.
Yeah. So that's why he puts on his own walrus costume so they can fight as equals.
It's a genuinely wonderful role reversal. And I think a completely fresh addition to the Frankenstein canon.
Yeah.
I've never seen Dr. Frankenstein dress himself up in corpse parts and have a cage match with the monster because he feels bad and wants to let him win and feel pride that he's defeated this, paternal creator figure.
Yeah.
I've never seen that staged like it is here. And as I've talked about before, Frankenstein is a Faustus story.
Sure.
It's the central two characters, the question of one who has all the power and the keys to the kingdom, and the other one has to be tempted by him. It's that same interplay between two characters. They're both basically stage plays about creation and power. I'm writing these roles in my notes as the striver and the blank check.
Okay.
So Faustus is sort of the striver, and Mephistopheles has, as the demon, has this blank check where he can offer the striver absolutely anything in the world or everything that is beyond this world.
Yeah.
And to use the characters of this story and plug them into that formula, Howard, who is the Dracula figure, he is the Dr. Frankenstein figure. Here, he's arguably a Mephistopheles desperately creating himself a Faustus.
Sure.
Which, again, I've never really seen.
Interesting.
I've never really seen that done. And I look for this, as you all know, everywhere.
Everywhere. Well, and because like Wallace is sort of that Faustus because he tracks down Howard because he sees the note and he's like, oh, he's going to tell me all these cool stories. He's going to be great content for my podcast. He's going to give me what I need.
His job is hunting down interesting people.
Yes. And so he's kind of looking for that. And then, but he's not planning to take it to quite the extreme levels that happen. And so Howard kind of creates that for himself. Really interesting. I like that. And
there's similar overtone to the legacy of Helen of Troy in the Faustus story, where she is... so Faustus demands like Helen of Troy. He's trying to test the powers of Mephistopheles. He's like, bring me her. Yeah. And we know it's not really her because she's dead. Yep. And it's suggested in the play that the Helen of Troy is a projection of Mephistopheles, whether it's him in this sort of false face, him with a mask on, or it's just this sort of puppet that he's creating and controlling. There's that idea of masked pleasures that are absolutely hollow. I feel like Howard eventually stops thinking of Wallace as human. And he starts thinking of him as Mr. Tusk.
Yes.
So it's the Mephistopheles fooling himself, making this projection like he's making Helen of Troy, but eventually he starts thinking it's the real Helen.
Oh, interesting.
He's using this just guy off the street who called up and came over to his house, and by the end of the movie, he's addressing him exclusively as Mr. Tusk.
Yes, right.
So he's buying into his own delusion.
Yeah.
You're seeing a desperate Mephistopheles. He can write the blank check, but he still needs someone else. You still need the straight man to make the joke work.
Yes, right.
And he's recruiting just anyone.
Yeah.
And he'll turn them into what he needs.
Yeah.
I've never seen that desperation and that kind of repositioned guilt in a story like this that borrows from these traditions of Dracula, Frankenstein, and Faustus.
Yeah. No, it's a really cool way to look at it.
There's so much going on here for an idea that was riffed out on a podcast.
Yeah, right.
Do you want to talk about creature design?
Yeah, the creature design is troubling. And I think what's so great is that because this movie is a bit over the top, like the effects are pretty absurd. Like the walrus suit is absurd, but it's also really troubling. You know what I mean? Like they overdid it, and it looks so Frankenstein-y. All the like sewn together bits, like
it's patchwork.
It didn't need to be that dramatic, but it's really effective for the movie, and I really like it.
It is surreal, but you also kind of believe it.
Totally, yeah.
Because it still showcases the actor.
Also because we see how it happened. We see the process by which he turns into this thing.
And it's the build that is so powerful here. And this reminds me of the shot when you see Bela Lugosi come down the stairs in Dracula. And he's got that perfect lighting and that little kind of slit of harsh white light across his eyes.
Yeah.
It's so heightened. It's so unnatural and stylized and surreal that it elevates him. And he becomes this other thing.
Yeah.
He's got an ethereal presence that the actor was able to bank on for the rest of his career. It hit people in a way that stuck for decades. And I think they kind of hit that same high here because the suit is so wacky. It's, that first head-on shot that you see partials, you see detail shots and fragments, and you know that he's being turned into this thing. You hear him kind of moaning or screaming. You see that limbs have been cut off. But when you get a real shot of the walrus creature, it's this head-on shot that looks like someone just put down the camera. There's no effort to dramatize or light it in a way that is going to elevate it, like that Dracula shot.
Sure.
It's just this static head-on shot that is genuinely unnerving and terrifying and complete. It's so still. He's not jumping at the camera. He's not snarling or attacking anything. It's just upsetting.
Yeah.
Like you said, unsettling creature design. And it's not moving like all the creature design in The Thing, for example, which was all that amazing prosthetic work.
Yeah.
It's not even that. He's just sitting there.
Yeah, I know.
And it's harrowing.
Yeah.
There's such, it's one moment and it holds for so long. And the film knows what it's got. And it lets you drink it in.
Yeah.
But you feel horror, sadness, and compassion.
Yeah, and because it's so absurd, it's like it's freaky, but it's also kind of funny.
Yeah.
But that makes you feel so awful and like sympathetic towards like just like the stripping of the dignity of Wallace, which I think is really interesting because Wallace is an asshole and you don't like him for the first half of the movie, like you know, because he's like this like arrogant, cheats on his girlfriend, only cares about fame.
Exploits and mocks people.
He's just like a douche, right? And
he's a sneering dirtbag. And Justin Long does that beautifully.
He does a really good job, right? And so you see that and you're like, okay, it's so we don't feel bad when he dies, like obviously,
exactly.
Right? So you're like, okay, like this is going to be like fun to see this creepy guy like destroy him because like he's a dick anyway, so who cares? But then when you see it actually happen, you're like, this is horrible.
The movie checks you on that impulse like Funny Games did.
Yes, and also with the girlfriend and the best friend, they both see the faults in Wallace. Especially because they are having an affair together. You know, they're the best friend and the girlfriend and they're sleeping together. So that's fun. They're, being shitty in that way. But they also see all the good parts in Wallace. And we get these lovely flashbacks where Allie, the girlfriend, and Wallace are talking about, like, Allie's like, I miss the Wallace I fell in love with. I miss this sweet guy who was really nice and blah, blah, blah. And you get the sense that it was similar with the best friend. So by having them try to track down Wallace throughout the whole thing, you sympathize and you feel bad for him. And so then it's more complicated than just, oh, he's bad, so we can kill him and it's fun.
And seeing that walrus shot was fairly overwhelming. With emotions and feelings and reactions, you kind of want to pull away, but you're riveted and you want to see all the details. Of all the emotions that hit me in that moment, none of them were satisfaction.
No.
He was a dirtbag for the first hour. You're totally right.
Yeah.
But when you see him brought this low, there's no joy in that. There's no humor. The humor evaporates out of the movie.
Yes.
And anything that would be funny or slapstick if I described it to you on a podcast becomes horrifying.
Yeah.
It becomes so upsetting and bleak and deranged. And that's such a great way to explode. I mean, they're already nailing one of the toughest needles to thread of pulling off a horror comedy.
Yeah.
But exploding the comedy halfway through and reaching this new weird level of horror.
Yeah.
It's so impressive because Wallace is instantly redeemed. And Justin Long has made us despise this character. He has... In the beginning of the movie, he has all of his limbs and faculties. So he gets to walk around. And like you said, he's just a prick.
Yeah.
But for the rest of the movie, after we see the walrus reveal, we see basically his eyes.
That's all you see, yeah.
And you hear the noises he can make.
Yeah, but he can't talk.
He doesn't speak ever again.
His tongue is cut out, so...
So the rest of the movie is... I mean, it's like prosthetic character work that develops who he is. And his whole role, his whole humanity is reduced to his eyes and these howls.
Yeah.
In the same way I was so impressed with how the movie handled this, Justin Long does some pretty incredible acting with his eyeballs and lack of words.
Yeah, no, he's very effective.
He's like throat singing for the second half of the movie.
Yeah.
And it's damning. Let's talk about the ending for a second.
Yeah, I was going to say, the ending is, I think, what really... The ending was so unexpected for me.
Yeah.
Because, so this is like, we're going to spoil the ending, okay? So, Justin Long kills Howard as a walrus with his tusks.
In their little walrus
which
fight.
are his own tibias, so that's fun. But yeah, so he kills Howard as a walrus. And then the best friend and the girlfriend show up and sort of rescue Wallace. But Wallace is trapped in this state of being a walrus, and so he's like kept in this weird like exotic animal facility, and they go to visit him at the end and they like feed him a fish and like say hi to him, but it's like the saddest, most depressing thing you've ever seen. And I figured, because like when the movie's playing out, I'm like, okay, Justin Long cannot recover from this. They're not just going to pull him out of the suit and it's all good, because his legs are gone, his arms are all like his whole life is over. So I figured he's just gonna die, and the fact that they let him live but in that awful state is like worse and way more sad, and it was really troubling. And just seeing the way that the friend and the girlfriend try to like maintain some sort of contact with him and bring him a fish and talk to him, it's just so weird. It felt
like a tragic, really genuine escalation of the Flanagan-style sad ghost twist.
Yeah.
Where by the end of the movie, you're not afraid of the ghosts, you understand who they were, and you feel bad for them, and you see them as reaching out to people. They're not like scary bump in the night things anymore. Wallace, we know he's still human and still aware.
Yeah.
Because we've been watching his eyes. We understand his emotions and who he was.
Yeah, and his brain is still fully intact, so...
The experience that he's undergone, not only with the transformation, but the murder that he was pushed to, has broken him.
Yeah.
And whoever Wallace is has receded.
Yeah.
Like, he knows he's fucked and broken and lost. And I don't know if he's stuck that way or if he's made a choice that he can't go back.
Yeah, because he can't be his old self in his physical state.
Right, because we see this little flashback with the girlfriend where she's talking about eyes and humans. Humans are the only ones that can cry in that way and react to things.
Yeah.
And the movie ends, you see her leave, and you see a tear go down his walrus face.
Yeah.
And we know he's human way before the tear.
Yeah.
There are also these references to, you see some kind of big gulps in his little walrus enclosure.
Yes.
Which is a callback to the beginning.
Yes. Yeah.
When he had that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But it's also the same beach ball that he had when he was trapped at the Dracula castle.
Yes.
When he was in that walrus enclosure and had that little pool. It looks like the same beach ball that was there. So there's this idea that he's still there.
Yes, right. He's stuck there. Yeah.
And not only is he stuck there psychologically, but he's basically in the same sort of cage.
I wonder if you could interpret this as like the ending is not literal, but it's just more him still being trapped there mentally. Like maybe he's just in, like maybe they got the walrus suit off of him, but obviously his limbs are gone and ruined. So he's just like in some sort of institution, but psychologically has not left that state. You
could also read it as sort of a cyclical ending, which is another popular choice for horror movies, right?
Yeah,
where there's this gesture at the end of things starting up again and the cycle continuing, where he has become the walrus. He has become this elevated character, and he inherits the guilt of the Mephistopheles character, the Dracula character, the Dr. Frankenstein character, where maybe he's isolating and hiding out because he's now also a murderer.
Yeah. Well, also you could interpret it as he has become the things and people that he used to exploit on his show.
Yeah.
Like he's now being observed and laughed at and gawked at. Like I don't know how public or private this exotic animal
he's in an enclosure with a little viewing space.
It looks pretty public. Yeah. So now he's become this like thing that people gawk at and make fun of. And so like it's almost like a little taste of his own medicine, but in the worst
It's
way.
a really potent ending.
Yeah.
And it's hard to, I'm trying not to let this get lost in the shuffle. This movie's really funny.
It is. I know. It's so funny because like Justin Long is, again, first half of the movie, pre-Walrus, he's just like an asshole, but it's funny to watch because he's such a dick. Like it's funny,
but it is exaggerated.
Yes,
like he's a podcaster. He's a bad person.
Yeah,
as they all are.
And like at one point, so like he's talking to the old man, and up on the mantle is a bone. It's the bone that goes inside the walrus's member, and Justin Long's like making fun of it and playing with it as a prop and like just being an immature.
He's just vulgar.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And so that's funny because he has the world's ugliest, worst mustache, and it's hilarious.
And the dialogue, the jokes, his podcast, the name of the podcast, it's all so over the top.
Yes.
That it's so satirical and fully realized, but never, it doesn't wink at the camera. That like it's such a parody. It's so farcical that it almost becomes subtle again.
Yes,
because it's delivered so nonchalantly. This is maybe the last great recommendation I can give the movie. It doesn't explain itself. It doesn't turn the camera and recap to you. This is the least condescending modern horror movie I've seen in years. It's like any ramblings in the script, it's Howard or it's Johnny Depp riffing in character. And it's always fleshing out a central backstory or giving you the lore about the serial killer. Both of those characters serve that end. Or the movie's quickly developing all of these twists of, like you said, the business partner, the co-host, and Mina, their affair, all of that B-plot, which is necessary to the whole payoff of the movie. But there's this earnestness throughout. It's like starting off as a joke, which obviously this did. There's record of that on their podcast.
And it's a hilarious concept.
But after it, like once you open the Word document, Kevin Smith is genuinely going for it here. This is a smart and passionate film. This is, genuinely, this feels like the ideal indie film.
Yeah, I was thinking about too, like why a walrus?
Yeah,
because it's such a random animal, and I'm sure there are lots of reasons you could extrapolate. But one thing I was thinking as well. Usually when you picture a walrus, it's like cute and silly. It's a silly looking animal. It's absurd, right? But
it can barely move around.
Yeah, it can't move. It's huge. It's got the tiny little flippers and these absurd tusks and the whiskers, But in actuality, walruses are like pretty dangerous and intense animals. I mean, if you've ever seen like the males, especially like fighting over mates and stuff, like with their tusks, like it's intense. Like walruses are intense, dangerous animals. And that's sort of what happens with this movie. Like you see it as like, what a silly, absurd concept. And you're like, oh, that's actually really intense.
Yeah.
And also, you know, you can think about, of course, like man dominating nature, but that's the Frankenstein idea, but you could do that with any animal. Also, males fighting over females. You have an infidelity situation in this story, but again, a lot of animals. I mean, that's throughout the animal kingdom, males fighting for domination. but still, so it's interesting to choose that animal. I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah, I'd like to end with this Stanley Kubrick quote that I just stumbled on today on Twitter that it kind of put some of this into perspective for me. So I think today's his birthday, so a lot of people are sharing things.
Oh, okay.
So he said, a film is, or should be, more like music than like fiction. It should be a progression of moods and feelings. The theme, what's behind the emotion, the meaning, all of that comes later. And this felt like, I feel like it had a progression of moods and feelings. And it left the theme, it left the explanation, the subtext. It didn't turn to the camera and scream it at you and closed caption it for you.
Yeah, right.
It did what art is supposed to do. Make an impression and never explain itself.
Yeah, right.
There was no plaque.
Leave it open. Yeah, that's really great.
And you can take it as just a goofy, dumb thing. But there's so much under the surface here. I was just, and I love that comparison to music, because we've got themes laid out in the beginning here. We've got overtures to Dracula and Frankenstein, Faustus by extension, and Kevin Smith builds those themes. He twists them and combines them and contrasts them. But then when you get that walrus reveal, which is the turning point for the rest of the film, it feels like he's just slamming on the low end of a piano. It's visceral, it's ugly, it's jarring, but it's memorable.
Yeah.
And I flashed back to this moment right after Wallace arrives at Howard's house, where he's walking around chatting with him. He's playing with the bone on the shelf, and he walks by the piano, and he does that.
Oh, yeah, it's true. He does.
And he just slams on a couple of the more dramatic keys.
Yeah.
Just as a joke.
Yeah.
And I love that is the effect of the movie. In the same way, the walrus becomes a metaphor for the sort of Trojan horse of the film. The piano becomes, I think, an in on the tone here. And the rhythm of this movie.
Yeah, that's really great.
I was just really impressed.
Yeah. It's a really fun one. It's weird. It's a really weird one, but really rewarding.
It's refreshing.
It's great.
It reminds you why you love great, dangerous, experimental, passionate art.
It's
I really liked this.
Really fun movie, and I really like Justin Long. I like everything he's in. I think he's a great actor.
Very ballsy. Very difficult role.
Yeah, he goes for it. So, this
Everyone
is
was great here.
So, thank you, Adam, for this recommendation. I'm so glad we got to watch this and talk about it. Don't respond to ads when old men say, hey, come to my house and I'll tell you a story, because then you'll be turned into a walrus. So, don't do it.
At best.
Yes. All right.
All right.
Toodaloo.